We want to bring in our producer, Sam Lisker, who has been in the courthouse all day today. Sam, if you're there, give us a sense of where you are right now and what it is that you're hearing, that you're seeing. What exactly are we waiting for at this moment?
Well, good evening. I just left the courthouse. I was in there for a few hours. I had been outside of it for a while and then realized that several of my colleagues had been waiting in the courtroom of Judge Robert McBurney. This is the guy who has been the judge who's been overseeing this grand jury case this week. And when I was in there, I noticed that it's very, very different from a federal court setting. Typically, you're not allowed to have your phone out. You're not allowed to have your laptop out. You kind of just have to sit there in silence. But when I was in there, reporters were chatty, but we were all very anxious because witness interviews were still ongoing. And in addition to the mood kind of feeling sort of anxiety inducing, there was also this eagerness that something was likely going to drop and it was going to be very, very late. And the judge did come in a couple of times. He actually made a couple of lighthearted jokes, even offered us some potato chips at one point, which was definitely different, not something you see in a federal court setting. But it was definitely more climactic, I think, than the indictment being handed down in D.C., which just happened a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, a big difference in tone, it seems, Sam. I was, internally, I was reading the dispatches that were coming back from you. And again, you don't see a federal judge Chutkin cutting up with reporters in the courtroom. That this is unusual. You've been in these situations before. What strikes you about that?
Well, honestly, I think it's just a location thing. Federal court versus a local court, and very different rules in both jurisdictions. And with this case, this is a big case. There are potentially several people that could be named in this indictment, and there are different rules here also in this county, in Fulton County, including actually being able to see the foreman of the grand jury, which was something I was not able to see in D.C., and something else that we're also keeping an eye for when the grand jury report actually comes out, the names of the jurors. That is something that is allowed to happen in Georgia, but again, that is entirely up to the judge. So lots of different rules to get used to versus a federal court setting.
One of the things, Sam, I saw a bit earlier is that maybe not all of the witnesses testified a bit earlier today. I saw George Cheedy, I believe his name is, the reporter in Atlanta, said that he wasn't needed today. Do we have a sense of how many people were still left to give their testimony, or how many folks did not get a chance to give their testimony today?
Well, initial reports that I had seen from other reporters that had more in-depth reporting into this than I did estimated that I think about 7 witnesses testified today, and there was about maybe 10 overall witnesses that the grand jury could potentially hear from. But yeah, George Cheedy, in his tweets, essentially was saying, well, I'm just sitting out here and waiting. I could be called in, and maybe I'm not called in. And he was right. The grand jury could take a vote without hearing from all witnesses, and that is exactly what happened.
Which it's so astounding to think, something of such consequence, and he's sitting out in the lobby like you're at the dentist's office waiting to go in, like this is a very big deal involving a former president. And again, the somewhat jovial demeanor of the judge there at the end, Sam, when he told you guys, hey, you got to go, don't leave your equipment here. Was this everything you hoped it would be? And I also noticed reporters seem to know where things are happening. They seem to know, oh, the clerk's office has some action right now. Let's get cameras over there. Were people getting tipped off? In other words, was the staff and the court itself amenable to all of this attention?
Well, that I'm not sure of, but obviously this case has been going on for many years, and reporters, specifically ones that are based here in Atlanta, have a lot more connections than I certainly do as a D.C. reporter, and they've been following this case for the last couple of years, so they've been going just day by day, month by month, just kind of figuring out what the next steps are in this proceeding. And just having that certainly, of course, helps. But another indicator, a lot of the offices, for example, the clerk's office, still had the lights on. And usually the grand jury we've read has typically met as late as 6:30 p.m. So this is absolutely a different sort of situation now that it is just after 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Fulton County.